Hey everybody, welcome back to Parkitect. And today I want to tackle Orchard Acres, which is a scenario that was also made by Joshua. And just because I've gotten quite a few questions about this, Joshua is basically the other person who has worked on scenarios, although the actual developers of Parkitect have also added some. As far as I know, Maple Meadows was made by Sebastian, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I'm usually mentioning Joshua because Joshua and I did just about half of the scenarios each. But also you can find more scenarios by Joshua on his Steam workshop page, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to actually point this out, so I'm sorry for taking all of this sweet time to finally explain this. But you can go to the link in the description and check out some of the other scenarios that Joshua has worked on if you're interested in trying out some other scenarios from him. I do have to say, I'm not sure if they were rejected from being scenarios in the game or what exactly the history is behind that. I know for me there were a few maps and ideas that never really worked out into anything, and I ultimately didn't push through into the game. So maybe it's something like that, but I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, what I'm trying to say usually with this is that I'm quite familiar with some of the scenarios that I've made myself. But then for some of these scenarios that Joshua has made, I might not be quite as good at them or, know the ins and outs of the map quite as well. And for this one, that's certainly the case. This is quite notorious for being difficult. I don't know too much about this park, but at least I do know that it sometimes can be a really difficult scenario if you don't manage it well enough. And we don't really get the whole story from the objectives here. We need to just get a happiness rating of 70% and sell 1,200 park tickets, which is kind of a different goal. Like, it's something that you'll eventually reach, no matter how bad your park might be. But you have to get to that happiness rating, and I'm not entirely sure how much of the challenge is going to come through that. But what I should say is that this map is really special for... wait, maybe I should actually show you the description. This map is pretty special because you have two separate plots. You have these two separate plots of farmland on which you can build an amusement park. And maybe there's this old guy who owns the center farm that can be convinced to sell his land. So I really like the idea of this. Like, one of these optional goals is gonna allow us to get the center land, I suppose, because we cannot buy it normally. And I suspect that you need to get to the price satisfaction rating of 70% and then you'll get the land in the middle. Not entirely sure, but it can definitely play a role, because unless you get to that, you have to basically juggle two parks at the same time, which can be quite difficult. So you need to, manage two of these spaces at the same time, get sufficient food and drinks and staff and everything in two completely separate parks. So that's kind of difficult. That's really like playing two parks at the same time until you manage to open up the space in the middle. Not to mention that this is quite a large space, so even connecting the two might be quite difficult. So I also have to say, I think I'll be focusing this scenario a little bit less on the scenery. I want to keep the look of the old farmland here and basically just work my way into these buildings. So yeah, it won't be quite as scenery focused, but maybe a bit more in terms of gameplay, that I'll do some more interesting things. And I still have to figure out how good I'll be at trying to manage two parks at the same time, because I've never done that before. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so my plan is to basically build whatever I want on either side of the fence, but try to use about half of the money for each side, to make sure that I get a decent amount of attractions in on both sides. Because something to keep in mind is that guests will only stay in one of the two halves of the park, so each of the halves of the park is gonna need to have some gentle rides and some more thrilling rides, some stalls and separate employees, and also whole separate scenery sets. So yeah, altogether this is gonna be quite difficult. Now for the scenery part of things, I'm kind of inspired by the farmhouse looks, but I want to do a little bit more than that. So I'm going for an American colonial architecture style town, which is something that I'm not too familiar with. So I definitely can't say that I'm an expert on this theme at all, but I like it and I think it fits into the map quite well, and it allows me to build some buildings other than simply farm buildings.
which adds some more variation into the scenery. So starting off is this building, which is inspired by those colonial church designs, with the usually the brick buildings with a pediment in the front in a classical Roman style, and then a really tall spire in the middle. Unfortunately, we don't have any brick walls, so this one is kind of the poor man's version with wooden walls. But in the end, especially for a farmer's village like this, I think this might actually be thematically consistent as well, so I'm pretty happy with it. And even with some very simple pieces and using the basic shapes for the pillars, because we don't have any big pillar pieces in this scenario, I think you can actually still do some decent looking stuff. So for me at least, I was a bit shocked when I saw just how little scenery pieces we have to play around with in this map, but I think it's a testament to the game's flexibilities that you can basically just do anything with any theme if you push it hard enough and if you try to come up with new uses for pieces. So I put a carousel in that church building, and I'm putting a food court in one of the existing farmhouses, and my next plan was to build a junior coaster. I'm not a huge fan of these things, but they do fit into the theme, they fit into the park quite well, and it's the best coaster I have. The other coaster is the mini coaster, and yeah, that thing is just kind of useless, especially if I want to get some slightly more thrilling rides into the park. So I'm going for the junior coaster here. And again, I'm trying to come up with a different kind of layouts that I haven't done before. So I'm playing a bit with the path layouts that we already have in the scenario to try and get some interaction between the path and the coaster. But the layout itself is just going to be a series of helixes until you get to the end again. So quite simple, but it is hopefully going to be one of my major money makers in the park, because I'm really concerned about money specifically. I think everything else regarding the challenges of this park will be fine, but I have no experience with a park like this, but I'm really afraid that having the guests spread out over 2 different parks means that both parks will be a little bit less busy, and you need to have extra employees and stuff because you need to manage the area separately. And of course, I'm only going to build 1 roller coaster, and usually a roller coaster is one of the biggest money makers, but here only about half of the visitors can actually visit the roller coaster, so that's a bit of a concern as well. So yeah, I have honestly no clue whether all of the things that I'm building right now are actually going to be there in the final attempt of the scenario, because if I fail, I'm gonna have to start all over again, and I'm not even sure how I'm going to tackle that. I just like to believe that I'm not going to fail this. Whatever the case, I finished the layout of the coaster and I'm moving on to the building for this station, which is again kind of a colonial house. It's really just a simple mansion, and I think that's just one of the only buildings that I can thematically really build in this area. I don't really want to add too many sort of generic coaster building stations or station buildings in general. I think there's definitely a look to station building architecture, like they're very typically primarily a rectangle shape with a roof supported by light supports, and even if you compare different themes, roller coaster stations usually have very similar shapes, and I kind of wanted to deviate from that and make it look really much more like it could be an actual colonial house, to give it more of the setting, to give the map more of an overall town setting rather than a theme park setting with a specific theme, to make it look even more as though they're really retrofitting an existing town into a theme park. So yeah, you'll see a bunch more stations that maybe look a bit different from what I typically do with the station, which is really just to build a wooden framework and build a roof over it and keep the station entirely open on the sides. But on this one I'm really following with filling it in with walls and windows and all of that stuff. And then for the scenery itself, I'm keeping it quite simple and also mostly sticking to the foliage that the park starts off with, which means a lot of poplar trees. I think those are poplars. I actually never checked the name, but they look like poplars. And the standard array of bushes that I always have. And I need to use terraforming a bit more often because I've always forgotten to use terrain painting in many of the scenarios that I play. So I'm painting the terrain a little bit to have some dirt underneath the coaster as well, which I think looks pretty neat. And finally rounding this whole section up with a spiral slide over here. And at this point I do have to admit, I already think that this side of the park is getting a bit unbalanced, like all of the good rides are here. And I'm not saying that because I haven't done anything in this video yet on the other side, but I have very limited rides that I can actually build. You start off with just a few flat rides and just 2 roller coasters, and I've used most of my decent options on the other side. So I'm gonna have to be creative in coming up with ways to make the guests on this side of the fence happy as well. So I'm building my second go-karts of the series. Unfortunately, there also aren't many go-kart scenery pieces available in this scenario, so I'm gonna have to be a bit creative with the scenery in terms of that as well. It's not going to really have a racing theme, it's just going to, well, go through the forest and just race through the foliage. But I think it should probably be a decent, flagship attraction for this side of the park to keep people happy. I'm not entirely sure how good go-karts are actually in Parkitect. I remember in Roller Coaster Tycoon they were absolutely OP and people were willing to pay insane prices for them and they got super high excitement ratings. But in this game I'm not even entirely sure how good these rides are, so I'm betting on this go-kart to actually save this half of the park until I get research to give me more rides. I'm really hoping for some good roller coasters because with just a junior coaster we're definitely not going to get there. And I decided to intermingle the go-karts and the paths a little bit and also have a vintage car ride go through the middle of all of that. So we have a bit of a car theme going on here, which I think, given that the idea for the theme of this park overall is some kind of orchard in an American rural landscape, I think that fits quite well. Not to mention that interaction between different tracked rides is always nice to have. I can imagine it being pretty fun to sit on the vintage car ride and see the go-karts passing by and seeing people race against each other. So although at the end of the day I'd much rather be in the go-karts, but then again, go-karts in theme parks are often a separately priced attraction, and when you're in a theme park, at least for me, I'd rather skip the go-karts and go for more typical theme park attraction things and make go-karts kind of a trip of its own. Although maybe that's just me. And to be fair, I really haven't been in a go-kart thingamajig, whatever you would call it, a go-kart stadium, go-kart track, I guess that works. But I haven't done it in way too long. I kind of want to do it again. But yeah, I think this would be a pretty nice track. I also did put a little bit of strategy into making the go-karts track at least somewhat fun. So there's a lot of curves in there, a bridge going over the path and a downward helix, of course, which is always quite challenging, and a tunnel underneath the path, which should also be a nice element. And overall just a lot of S-bends and tight curves. So I don't know, I might not be an expert when it comes to building racing tracks, but I think this should be a decent enough track. I really like the go-karts in Parkitect in terms of just how much freedom you get to build large sweeping curves and things like that. That's always something that kind of destroyed my imagination in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 because the curves are just so insanely tight. I just kind of wish that this park would, or that this scenario would actually start out with some of the go-kart details like the guardrails along the sides. But hey, that's something I can't really complain about. Although, come think of it, I haven't checked if they have the barrels or the tires in the small scenery section. I should come back to that later, because if they do have those, then I could definitely add some of those alongside the sides of the go-kart track. Anyway, I'm keeping that large open space in the middle of the go-kart track next to the path empty, because I think that might be a good place for a flat ride at some point later in the scenario. I'm basically praying that I'll actually get a flat ride that fits in there, because some of the flat rides in this game are absolutely huge, so I might not even get a ride that fits in there. But if I do get something like, I don't know, a swinging ship or anything really, one of the 4x4 thrill rides or gentle rides. That would be a really nice addition in the middle of that area. And I'm also adding a small area with a Ferris wheel. I think for the other side of the park, we have the church as the major weenie, and you kind of have a small boulevard leading up to the church, which is quite nice. And on this side, I also wanted to have a weenie, but I also needed another flat ride, so I think the Ferris wheel should do both functions alright. And yeah, that is the overall design for this area. Quite simple and a bit similar to the other area, but this one feels a bit more urban and a bit more gardened, whereas the other one, to me at least, feels a bit more foresty. And they definitely do have a different theme, but altogether I also think they work quite well with the buildings that are already in the game. This station building for the vintage cars kind of has an English looking chimney, but I think altogether it could still fit into American colonial architecture, and the same inspiration kind of goes for the station of the go-karts as well, which is perched on top of a little hill and kind of has a view over the entire plaza here. So altogether I think it's a decent setup of buildings. And finally I'm adding a small barn over here, which I'm placing the food court inside, and using some of that white timber work that you'll sometimes see on barns, just for some detail. And I think that should be a good sort of counterpart for the barn food court on the other half of the park. In any case, as you can see, I'm actually quickly running out of money, so at this point I had to stop theming because I had no money anymore. I'd even taken a loan, so that's kind of a problem. So yeah, I've played the game on paused mode so far. I think it's a good idea to actually play it for a bit and see if I can somehow run a profit on this park. Alright, so I'm gonna do something that I haven't done on any of my playthroughs so far, and I'm gonna do a bit of management live, because this is going to be crucial, and if this goes horribly wrong, I at least want to have some proof of what happened and how it happened. If not for you guys, then maybe even for myself, so I can go back and see what went wrong. So we're gonna have to open everything, and I think, yeah, nothing's really open yet. I have no idea how much money you can ask people for the go-karts, so I'm gonna start with $6, and I'm just gonna jack up the price until they don't want to pay for it anymore. I'm really hoping that people really want to pay up for it, because otherwise I think I'm royally screwed. This thing has 0 ratings. It's waiting for new test results, which, fair enough, I'm gonna need to play the game eventually for that. And this one has an excitement of 28. That's quite a lot. I've noticed in general that scenery, while being extremely expensive, really does help ratings quite a bit. So I'm really happy that at least scenery plays a role in gameplay if you choose to go for it, very much like it did in Roller Coaster Tycoon, at least on a number of the scenarios. That said, of course the game can't really figure out what looks nice, because that's very subjective and there's really no objective measure for it. So you can always just spam bushes and make everything look really ugly with a lot of scenery pieces, and you'll get high ratings for it. But altogether, I'm happy that at least, you know, the effort that I put into making parks look nice gets rewarded in terms of gameplay on some level. Now I need some janitors, so I'm just gonna put 1 janitor and 1 mechanic in each side of the park. I'm gonna need some haulers to get the stuff to the shops. We've got the depot here, and then we've got another depot here, and yeah, that should be more or less fine. And then of course I'm also going to need a janitor and a mechanic in here. That's all that I'm going to start off with. I really don't want to go too far yet. I first want to see how much money I can actually earn. Then there's also the question of research. As I already pointed out, I have a very limited amount of rides on this scenario. These are some of the gentle rides. We've used all of these. The thrill rides, we've used all of these. The coaster, well, I haven't done anything with the mini coaster, but you can forget about it. And then there are some water rides, which are really not all that good, and I don't have a big pond or lake to use anyway, so yeah. I guess I could use the Calm River ride for something, but that's kind of like a car ride, and I don't want to turn this park into a trip drill where 90% of the rides are just track rides. No offense to Tripsdrill, they're absolutely beautiful, but that's not something that I want to go for here. I think that's a decent enough start. I'm just really curious to see if I can even earn any money on this park. I'd be happy to break even at this point. As soon as I notice that I'm breaking even or that I'm losing money though, I think I'm just going to pause the game again. Although, no, I should probably keep it running for a while to get some research, to get, first of all, a jumper. That'll be quite useful. It has a decent intensity rating. But at some point I should also get a new shop, because what's a little bit inconvenient that I haven't really mentioned so far is even the shops that we get are very limited, and we've got the necessities. Thank God we have toilets and an info kiosk. Actually, I didn't want to ruin my experience by looking up a playthrough of this scenario, just as I haven't done that with any of the scenarios that I've played so far. These are all blind playthroughs. But that said, I did read a few guides, and they pointed out that info kiosks are a no-go on the scenario, because people will get a map and will want to go to the other side of the park, but then they can't. And I'm not entirely sure if this is true or not. Based on that risk, I don't want to risk putting down an info kiosk. I'll just get umbrella stores when the time comes and when it starts raining. Speaking of which, I'm definitely going to play some of those as well, but I'm first going to wait. I have no idea what the climate is like exactly in this scenario. It's currently -3 Celsius, so it's extremely cold. But I'm not sure how much precipitation we're going to get in this one. Anyway, I think people are actually getting on this thing. That's pretty good. What was that person's name just now? Ah, forget about it. I thought that person had a really strange name, but I didn't quite catch it. Okay, so people are willing to put down $7 for this. I mean, they're willing to put down 6, but I'm gonna hike that up to 7. Hopefully people are still willing to go on this. That should be a decent income at least. But that said, overall, it looks like I'm not going to make any profit on this. Let's speed up the simulation a tiny bit. I'm keeping costs down as much as I can, having not too much staff and everything. Oh, I haven't opened all of the rides yet. I should definitely do that. This should be 2.1 at least based on the excitement rating. Could even possibly be a little bit more. I could always try and micromanage some of the prices if I end up getting in money trouble. But yeah, this should at least bring in some extra guests again. I think people are enjoying this coaster. I should probably make this one a little bit more expensive. We'll see if they want to pay $8 for this. Probably not, but if they do, then that's great. It's doing alright, actually. God, I need to change the color scheme. I haven't changed the colors of the cars yet, so I'm definitely going to want to change that. I already got a happiness rating of at least 70%, so never mind. That's not going to be the challenge of this park. The challenge is trying to stay afloat and not let the park go bankrupt, I suppose. I don't really like these colors. I'd like to go for something of a wooden kind of look. Oh, this yellow. Yeah, there's the imminent bankruptcy. Right, so by the end of May, I need to make profit. God. Okay, sure. Alright, we got the jumper. I'm gonna decrease the money that I'm putting into research by quite a bit. Should I research shops or... Okay, I'm just gonna research shops. I really don't want people to start complaining because they have nothing to drink, which is a problem that I have at the moment. God. Looks like people are still queuing up for this, even though it's $7. Alright, let's make it 8 then. Let's keep going until they stop going on this. Ooh, this is losing this is losing money. Oh, I can probably hack this up to $4. The Ferris wheel. People are still getting on this. In fact, the queue time is too long, so let's make that a tiny bit more expensive. I don't think they'll pay more than $3 though, but I'm gonna try it with $3.50 first. Alright. Now, as for this coaster, people are still paying $8 for it. But I think there are less people on it. Maybe I'm wrong, but kind of seems that way. It's making a profit anyway, so that's good. And I could probably... Wait, did the excitement rating on this just go up by a lot? Whatever. I could probably raise this to $3, see if people are willing to pay that. And the carousel is closed. God, why do I always forget to open rides? That's really dumb. And I'm gonna try and make this $2. Hopefully people are willing to pay that. Maybe this is a little bit too expensive, but we'll see. Whatever the case, that's minus 62 in a month, so that's almost a profit. At least I might be able to avoid bankruptcy. I'm gonna save right here, because this month is gonna be everything. I forgot to open this thing, of course. Classic Silvarret move right there. That's the strategy, really, to forget to open things and then make the video really exciting and make you wonder whether or not I'm actually gonna make it, to reveal that I had an ace up my sleeve all the time. No, I just always forget to open rides. But I think with the twister here, we should be able to draw in more guests, and that should hopefully fill up the rides a bit better. Oh god, a group of vandals is just about the last thing that I needed right now. Alright, so I'm gonna switch to decoration and see where those vandals are at. Because if I catch one of them in the act, I can at least ban them, and that'll save me a lot of trouble later on. Yeah, because I don't have money to replace anything. Oh, that just happened. Okay, who is this? I just saw something being broken, but I don't see any vandals as far as I'm aware. Usually if you see a vandal, they are wearing a bandana, so... I think... Oh, there he is. Get out of here. So he's getting banned, but there are probably some more... Yep, here's another one. Alright, you are leaving the park, sir. You too. Oh my god, that's a lot of vandals. And he would have even gone on to go-karts. That's a shame. I think that's it. But judging by... No, get out of here. Judging by the look of the park, they already did a lot of damage. Oh my god. Alright then. I'll get one of my mechanics. I'm gonna have to check where my mechanics are. So this mechanic is here. So this is the mechanic that I'm gonna have to pick up and fix the vandalism with. But we also have some vandals running over here, so I'm gonna have to check that as well. I'll let the game play in a second, but for now I like to pause the game while I'm searching for the vandals, because they should still be pretty close to the stuff that they destroyed. At least they're very recognizable, I'll give them that. It's a bit ironic that really they're using these bandanas to hide their identity, but the fact that they're wearing them is giving me the clues that they are the vandalizers. I think that's it. There might be another one, but yeah, I think that's most of them. Oh, there we go. Here's another one. God, that's a lot of vandals. Not gonna lie, these guys are kind of overpowered. They are really able to single-handedly destroy the whole look of your park and bring your rating down. But I'm making a profit, at least. So that's really good. So from this point onward, I can at least take a bit of a breather. It's gonna take a while to actually get back into the positives again. But I think for now, if I just let the game run for a bit and try to manage anything that goes wrong, I can make a profit, get back into enough money to build some more rides, and then things should start rolling from there again. So yeah, I avoided bankruptcy, so I'm really happy with that. Now let's see if I can build some other stuff soon. Alright, so I'm starting off with a wild mouse coaster, which is not my favorite coaster type, but it's what the research gods decided to bless upon me. I did have the wooden coaster as well, but I want to fit that in somewhere else, and also I don't like the powered coaster, so that was out of the question anyway. I mean, this is a decent coaster type, don't get me wrong. I think from a gameplay perspective, it's actually really good. You can build these things very cheaply, and people will really appreciate it and pay a lot of money for these things. And as long as you space out your block breaks well enough, you can get people to pay a lot of money for these as well. And I know Marcel Vos doesn't really like these in Roller Coaster Tycoon because of all of the block break shenanigans. But this is Parkitect, and we have to really be realistic. And if we need a high capacity ride, we really have to get those block breaks in order. So yeah, altogether, it's a nice ride type. It's just always the same. You just have some hairpin turns and some drops, and that is basically it. So with this layout, I'm trying to deviate from the standard Wild Mouse layout as much as I can, but it's really difficult. These things are typically placed on a rectangular layout with always the hairpin turns and the drops in the same locations. So all that I'm really doing here is building the standard layout, but just kind of shuffling with the order of things and with the placement of things. It's still not the greatest thing, but at least it's a bit more interesting than a regular Wild Mouse, and you can adapt it somewhat to the terrain. So I have more space here than a standard Wild Mouse layout would take, so I'm deciding to use at least as much of that space as I realistically can, while keeping this also a believable Wild Mouse layout. I don't think that from a gameplay perspective it will be too important, because I'm already earning some decent money as well. But part of the reason why I built the Wild Mouse first is also just because it's such a cheap coaster. I really didn't have the money to afford anything big yet, and this thing should also earn me some extra cash for when I do decide to build the wooden coaster. Also kind of funny, I decided to play around with the color scheme for this coaster quite a bit, and really what I usually just do is drag those color sliders randomly until I find something that looks alright. Well, not completely randomly, at least going off of color schemes that I know from heart, but I ended up going with almost the default color scheme of yellow and blue. These are slightly different shades from what you start off with, but it's actually very similar to the default color scheme of this ride, which is something that I normally don't really like doing, but for some reason I kind of feel like it fits into the vibe of the scenario for some reason. Not sure why, it just feels right compared to all of the other safer options that I was looking into. And I think also this ride should probably finish off this area of the park quite neatly, because I'm already getting somewhat close to the core of this scenario. I have to say, once I got past the stage where I kept going bankrupt, this scenario became a whole lot easier, and now it's almost too easy. I don't want to say that too quickly or I'll definitely jinx it. But yeah, judging by how quickly I'm storming towards the final goal for this scenario, I do want to start wrapping up things, so I'm not going to use the entire space of this park. So this Wild Mouse is where I'm kind of proclaiming the park border. This is the one final large structure that kind of closes off the rest of the park that I won't be using. And the orchards, which I'll just leave alone, because even though this is a park themed to orchards, I'm really just building around those rather than building on the same spot, which I guess kind of makes sense. I'm pretty sure that this scenario is inspired by an existing old scenario in Roller Coaster Tycoon, of which I'm not entirely sure what the name is anymore or which expansion pack it came with. It definitely came with an expansion pack, but Roller Coaster Tycoon had a scenario as well, where you were building a theme park in an orchard, and it always kind of irked me that while you were doing that, you were basically destroying the orchard itself. So I don't know, that was kind of strange, and I think there are a lot of scenarios with ethical issues like that, and at least this park doesn't really have that. It kind of seems like some of these farmhouses were abandoned. You know, they're not used anymore, they're completely empty, but you still have an active orchard nearby, and it just provides a nice sort of setting for a theme park. And I think it's to an extent even a realistic one. I've definitely seen theme parks with at least, you know, farm themes like this. They're usually not very big, but it's always a nice setting for a charming theme park. Anyway, I guess that's a little bit of an off-topic ramble about the whole idea of agricultural theme parks. It's an interesting thing for sure. Maybe it could even be used for educational reasons. You know, sometimes theme parks can definitely take on more of a social role, either keeping certain traditions or cultures in vogue and making it, through commercializing it at least, still somewhat relevant, or educating people about animals or nature or a certain kind of culture. You know, I think there are uses for theme parks other than just entertainment, especially zoos. I think as a sort of subset of amusement park can fill that kind of role. Anyway, I said I was going off topic, wasn't I? So I'm just filling in the rest of that area, or I was just filling in the rest of that area with another flat ride, and that's basically for that side of the park. So now I'm going back to manage this side of the park, finish some of the scenery that I left behind. But after all of that, it is finally time to do something which I've been wanting to do the whole time with this park, because I think thematically it fits, and it also just really fits the map with the road running past the park, and that is to build a wooden coaster here. Very often, especially with some of these older parks with their out and back wooden coasters, you'll see that wooden coasters are kind of a billboard for the park. And you see that nowadays with a lot of different coasters as well. If you go to Six Flags parking lot or Cedar Point parking lots, you'll see a lot of coasters next to the parking lot as well, or even on the parking lot if you're Six Flags Magic Mountain. But it used to be very much a typical thing to do with wooden coasters. So you always have these long out and back wooden coasters next to the parking lot or the public road to kind of advertise for, hey, there's a theme park here that might be worth visiting. And that's the one thing that I'm really doing with this wooden coaster here. I'm trying to put this on display as much as I can. Trying to even alternate some of those airtime hills, you know, so that it all weaves nicely in and out of each other if you're looking from the side of the road. And yeah, that's basically the point of this wooden coaster. And it kind of connects the two parks as well, because I couldn't really realistically fill in the space between the parks with real, you know, park sections with a different themed land with all kinds of different rides. But I think the easiest way to kind of connect these two parts of the park is to build a coaster between it, which kind of visually connects both sides of the theme park, while at the same time leaving the entire orchard intact and not really messing with that in any big way. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I think this wooden coaster was a pretty good idea. It's not the most exciting though, and these are always kind of boring layouts to build as well, because really all you just do is up and down, turn around and go up and down again, and yeah, then you're pretty much done. But I think it fits the theme too well, and it fits the general layout of the park really well. I will be making a path over here as well, so that's why I am also fencing off some of the existing paths here to prevent people from walking into the orchard, which was actually accidentally happening a little bit earlier. That was annoying. Just to make sure that people can actually walk between the two sides of the park, so you're not getting ripped off anymore getting a park ticket, because once again, returning to ethics, I think it is quite unethical to have two parks with the same ticket. You know, if you're not well educated about which attractions are in which side of the park, then you might have gotten into the wrong side and you're completely screwed. And if you want to do all attractions, you would have to buy 2 tickets. I think there's just there's all kinds of problematic issues related to the whole 2 parks, 1 ticket thing. So yeah, we should probably solve that, and I think having a path in between the 2 halves is probably the best way to do that. And finally, for the station, I really couldn't care much about how this station looks. Wooden coaster stations in general tend to be quite simple and really just a platform with a roof supported by wooden supports, wooden frameworks. So I'm really not deviating from that formula too much. I just wanted to play it safe at this point. Maybe mess with a few roof shapes, but in the end I couldn't really find much that I thought looked good anyway. So yeah, keeping this all quite simple, really. Just the bare minimum that works and fits into the rest of the theme of the park. But yeah, that is basically all I have to do and say for this part of the episode. Now I was kind of running into a bit of a problem, because I was almost reaching the objectives of the scenario, but I was nowhere near finished with the park. So I hope you'll excuse me if we just take another quick moment to, in real time, see the objectives be met and see everybody celebrate. And then afterwards I'll try to finish up some of the stuff that I left hanging in the rest of the park. Alright, there we go. Caught it. Oh shit, I need to hold it for 3 weeks. Well, time for a small time lapse then. I'm gonna try and do as much as I can with the amount of money and time that I have left, which is mostly foliage related stuff. I'm finishing some of the paths that didn't really lead anywhere. I'm just closing those off, adding a bunch of foliage and detailing around the wooden coaster and also the path going through the orchard, which I'm actually finishing for once, which I hadn't done yet, and adding a few path elements and fences along the route as well. It's all quite simple and really not that detailed, and I'm not even adding any more rides, but it's just about all that I could do with the money and time that I've left, and I think it's a decent way to finish the scenario before reaching the objective. So let's see how it turned out. Alright then, now we should be good to go. Alright, and that's it. That's a wrap. Overall, I'm actually really glad that I finally finished this scenario. I know it's not something that you guys have experienced in this video, but I've had to restart this save so many times, so I'm just really glad to get this over with. This was without a doubt the most difficult scenario so far, at least for me personally, and it's the one where I kind of had to throw away some of my ideas about theming and scenery in order to actually finish the scenario. That said, I'm quite happy with the final result. It might not be as heavily themed and as densely packed as some of the parks so far, but I do think it fits into the orchard theme decently. And I didn't have to restart anything. I would have been so depressed if I had to throw away all of my progress just because I couldn't make the park work. Somehow I managed to make it work, and I'm really happy about that. Just want to give you guys a quick overview of everything that I built in the entire video. So we've got the junior coaster here, which is a pretty simple coaster with very simple stats. Honestly, not even that much of a money maker. It's only started to make decent money in, lag spike, in the last couple of months when there's been more guests in the park. But until that, I really had to put a lot of advertisement on this ride to get people to ride it, and it still doesn't make that much money. That said, I think as far as realism goes, it's good that we've got it here in the park. It really fits into the scenery. Then the wooden coaster, of course. I do want to do a quick POV of this one as well. Let's get the other train. There we go. I gave this thing 6-seater trains. Actually, I need to increase the minimum waiting time on that one. Don't want it to stand still on the lift hill. But yeah, I gave it 6-seater trains just because it's very much a classic out and back wooden coaster. And classic wooden coasters typically have these larger cars. So I think that fits. It's a little bit slow here on the turnaround, but that's also very much a traditional woody kind of thing. And it catches some decent airtime on some of these hills. Classic double up as well. Maybe could have done that as a double down as well, but I like it the way it fits at the moment. And finally, some slightly more twisty bits at the end, but even though these bits are a bit more twisty, they're still quite simple, really. A mosquito just flew in front of my face. I think I can hopefully find that thing again, because I'm going to bed soon and I don't want to deal with that. Anyway, that's the wooden coaster. And the last thing to maybe go over for a bit is probably the Wild Mouse coaster, which should be doing its block sections alright. I had an earlier time when the block sections weren't set up correctly, so they would all have to stop here and there, but now it should be one smooth ride until maybe something breaks down or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty much as I talked about earlier. It's just such a simple coaster with a simple layout every time that there's really not too much that you can, add in terms of variation. It's just hairpin turns and ups and downs, and that's basically it. But as far as that layout premise goes, I think this is a decent way to add at least some variation by having it in slightly different orders. And hell, even making it a bit taller. I really like it when... oh god, I don't like that it still stops on the last brake run. Could have maybe fixed that. But yeah, I really like it when Wild Mouse coasters have a large drop at some point in their layout. I know that the one in Europa Park, which I wrote recently, has this really cool first drop after the lift hill. A lift hill, which is also a really awesome part of the ride that I don't want to spoil, because if you're ever going to Europa Park and you don't know what the lift hill of that Wild Mouse coaster is like, it's a really cool experience, and it's especially cool if you don't see it coming. Anyway, that's our Wild Mouse here. And then the last area that's kind of interesting is the one with the go-karts, which I'm actually decently happy with as well. So yeah, altogether, I'm glad that I managed to finish the scenario at all. And with a decent looking park that, after all of the bankruptcy troubles that I went through with the new coasters and all the new rides, is actually doing really well right now. But God, was this one really difficult. This one totally beat me up. As far as I've heard from a lot of people, many people seem to have said that this was the scenario that they struggled with the most. So from here on out, maybe it shouldn't be getting easier per se, but at least I shouldn't have to be as afraid of going bankrupt. But still, something that I should stay on the lookout for, because I really don't know what I'll do if I put a lot of effort into a park and I eventually have it go bankrupt and don't find a way to somehow manage to finish it. Oh yeah, and one thing I forgot. I got the trophy, and the trophy is this farmhouse building here. And the next scenario that we get is, I'm not entirely sure actually, but let's see, Hickory Hill. I didn't think that was already coming up here, but I know what that is, and I'm looking forward to it. But I think the next episode will probably be Coaster Canyon. Anyway, we'll see when the time comes. Bye guys.